Now, of course, in 2025, there's no shortage of things that qualify as absurd. But every once in a while, you see something that is so absurd that you actually check the date and the time and the channel to make sure that it's not satire. And that's what I was feeling when I saw that Fox Nation just handed out its Patriot of the Year award, and the winner was Melania Trump. Yes, that Melania. The same Melania who has spent most of the past decade politely avoiding America, the one who's been spotted in public roughly as often as Bigfoot, and who once famously wore a jacket that said, "I really don't care, do you?" while visiting detained migrant children. Apparently, that's the new face of American patriotism. So today, I want to talk about what it actually means to be a patriot, at least in my opinion. Because if Melania Trump is the bar now, then it's lying somewhere between symbolic participation trophy and performance art. But there are real patriots out there, people who love this country enough to challenge it and protect it and make it better. And, maybe everyone on this list wouldn't be eligible for it this year, but these I put forth as examples of what it actually means to be a patriot. Happy Friday, everybody, and welcome to another supplemental installment of Back Porch Files from your neighbor on the left, the podcast about liberal politics, human decency, and life on the blue side of America's ideological divide. My name is Don Spielis, your opinionated host. So let's just begin with the obvious concept that Fox Nation giving out a Patriot of the Year award is a little bit like McDonald's hosting a wellness retreat. It's branding, not substance. It's a network that spent years turning grievance into a business model, handing out an award for patriotism to whoever flatters the right people in the right way. And this year's honoree is Melania Trump, a woman who, if patriotism were measured in visible enthusiasm for America, would be ranked somewhere just below my houseplants. Now look, this isn't about being unkind to her personally. She's lived her life in the shadow of a man who can't stand not being the center of attention. And I get that that is very complicated. But when you think of Patriot of the Year, do you picture someone who spent the last decade in relative silence, occasionally auctioning NFTs and Christmas ornaments? Or do you picture someone who's actually defended this country's principles, who's risked something, who's made us better? And that's the thing about Fox's idea of patriotism. It's not about doing anything. And in this case, I don't even think it's about appearing patriotic. In this case, I think it's about their continued obsession with currying favor with Donald Trump. But generally speaking, in terms of patriotism in Fox, you wave the biggest flag, you wear the shiniest lapel pin, you throw in a few God Bless Americas, and as long as you're politically convenient, they're willing to clap for you and hand you a trophy shaped like a bald eagle eating a liberal. But real patriotism, the kind that matters, it's quieter, it's harder, and it usually comes with some risk. Now, before I get into the specific examples, I want to get one thing out of the way here. There are millions of examples that we're all well aware of, and that would be the individuals who are serving in our armed services and put their lives aside in order to take up the cause of our country. All those people, every last one of them, I would say qualifies as a bigger patriot than the First Lady. But that's just my opinion. But anyway, the specific examples. Let's take, for starters, Judge J. Michael Luttig, a lifelong conservative respected by Republicans for decades. And yet, when Donald Trump tried to overturn the 2020 election, Luttig didn't play along. He stood up at personal and professional cost and said, no, this is not how democracy works. That is patriotism. It's not flashy. It's not partisan. It's integrity when it counts. Or how about Ruby Freeman and Shay Moss, two Georgia election workers, just regular people who became targets of a smear campaign when Trump's lawyers, remember Rudy Giuliani, bless his wine-soaked soul, accused them of rigging votes. They faced death threats. Their lives were torn apart. And through it all, they kept their faith in the democratic process. That is patriotism. They didn't have Secret Service protection or a cable contract. They had courage. Speaking of courage, let's mention Officer Eugene Goodman. If you've ever seen that footage from January 6th, you know what I'm talking about. He's the guy who faced down a mob of insurrectionists by himself, luring them away from the senator's chambers, saving lives, and protecting the heart of democracy. He didn't need an award. He didn't ask for an award. He just did his job. And that's what makes it heroic. Meanwhile, Fox News is out here polishing trophies for whoever looks best standing next to Trump at a podium. It's like rewarding someone for watching the house burn down because they liked the color of the flames. Now let's talk about some other names. People who keep this democracy functioning while most of the political world is busy performing for cameras. Jocelyn Benson, Michigan's Secretary of State, who faced threats and harassment just for making sure votes were counted fairly. Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, a Republican, by the way, who refused Trump's request to, quote, find votes, end quote. Votes, by the way, that didn't exist. And Michael Adams in Kentucky, another Republican who worked to expand voting access because he understood that democracy only works if everyone can participate. These are not glamorous people. They're not on magazine covers. But if patriotism had a union, these folks would be the shop stewards. And then there's the quiet kind of patriotism, the kind that doesn't make headlines but keeps the country together when the noise starts to get unbearable. Dr. Ashish Jha, who helped steer the country through a pandemic with more grace and calm than most of us could muster just trying to find toilet paper. Or Jose Andres, the chef who's turned feeding disaster victims into a calling, showing up in places where governments are still arguing over logistics. And Dolores Huerta, who's been fighting for workers' rights for more than 70 years. 70 years. She was shouting, "Si se puede," before half the people at Fox Nation were born. But no award for her, apparently, because, too much substance there, not enough sequins. And then there's Captain Larry Taylor, a Vietnam veteran who literally risked his life flying a helicopter through enemy fire to rescue soldiers on the ground. He didn't do it for applause or awards. He did it because leaving people behind wasn't an option. And how about Jon Stewart? Yeah, the comedian, that's the one I'm talking about, who spent years shaming Congress into taking care of veterans and 9/11 responders. He's been more patriotic in those hearings than most politicians are in a lifetime of flag-draped speeches. And if we're going to talk about patriotism, let's talk about truth. Catherine Herridge, a journalist who refused to reveal her sources even when it cost her job. Judy Woodruff, the embodiment of journalistic integrity, who spent decades giving Americans facts without the fury. Maria Ressa, who stood up to authoritarianism, won a Nobel Peace Prize for defending press freedom, and still faces threats for telling the truth. Compare that to Fox, where truth means repeating Trump talking points in slightly different fonts. And there's Brian Stevenson, founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, who's devoted his life to confronting racial injustice and reforming our criminal justice system. Heather Cox Richardson, a historian who's done more to educate Americans about democracy in plain language than most civics classes manage in a semester. And Darnella Frazier, a teenager who filmed the murder of George Floyd. She didn't set out to make history, she just had the courage to hold her phone steady when the world was falling apart. That's not performative patriotism, that's moral bravery. So when Fox Nation gives an award called Patriot of the Year to Melania Trump, you have to ask, what exactly are they celebrating? Is it love of country or loyalty to brand? Because patriotism in their world is about optics. It's about who salutes the flag in the right direction and who flatters the right power structure. But real patriotism isn't about who looks patriotic. It's about who acts patriotic. The real patriots aren't at Mar-a-Lago galas or on the sets of cable news programs. They're in polling places and hospitals and classrooms and helicopters and kitchens. They're the people who choose principle over popularity, service over self, and truth over comfort. They're the ones who keep the whole experiment called America from sliding completely off the rails. So congratulations, Melania. Enjoy the trophy or whatever you get. But the rest of us will be over here doing the actual work of loving our country by trying to protect it, trying to improve it, and refusing to let it become a parody of itself. Because patriotism isn't about waving a flag the hardest. It's about doing the hard things for that flag. It's about accountability, empathy, honesty, the stuff Fox News seems allergic to. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we stop letting networks and politicians or billionaires define what patriotism means. Maybe it's time we redefine it ourselves. Because the real patriots, you don't need to search far to find them. They're not on stage. They're next door. They're your neighbors. And some of them might even be on the left. All right, thank you very much for listening to this supplemental Back Porch Files from the Your Neighbor on the Left podcast. I want to thank you all for your time, and I encourage you to please reach out to the podcast. You can do that with any of the social media platforms that the podcast uses. The links for all of those are on the Linktree page, and of course, the address of the Linktree page is within the episode description. We'll be back on Tuesday with another full episode of Your Neighbor on the Left. So until then, stay engaged, stay kind, try and be patriotic, and as always, have the week you'd wish for others.